The prophecies of the Old Testament respecting the Messiah considered and proved to be literally fulfilled in Jesus by Dr. John Gill, narrated by David Clark. The design of the following sheets is to consider prophecies of the Old Testament respecting the Messiah and to prove that they are literally fulfilled in Jesus against both Jews and deists. I have therefore collected together the exceptions of the former of those prophecies, and the rather because they are, as far as known, made use of by the latter. I have consulted, as much as I was able, the writings of both the older and latter Jews, and show that in most, if not in all the prophecies considered, they have understood them of Messiah. I produce those authorities not as decisive in this controversy, but as the convictions and concessions of an adversary, and that a bitter and implacable one to Christianity, and which I think deserves consideration with the deists. I cite old Jews to show the sense of the ancient synagogue, and the latter ones to show the strength of conviction upon their minds, who cannot but have observed what use the Christians have made of those prophecies, and though often pinched with them, yet they have been obliged to own them as prophecies of Messiah, for which reason the testimonies of latter Jews seem to have the most strength and force in them, and that the reader may not be at a loss about old Jews and latter Jews. He is desired to observe that both old Jews, I mean those who wrote or are supposed to have wrote within the first 5 or 6 centuries after Christ, the authors of the Targum, Talmuds, Raboth, Zohar, and by latter Jews, I mean those who wrote within the last 5 or 6 centuries as Maimonides, Jarchi, and Ibn Ezra, Shimkai. The author of the scheme of literal prophecy, whose exceptions I have all along considered, has advanced several things with regard to the belief of the Jews concerning a Messiah, which I think myself obliged to take notice of in this place. First, he seems to insinuate that, as though the belief in a Messiah among the Jews was not anciently a fundamental article of their faith, but made so from the 11th century, and when their confession of faith was drawn up by our Moses Maimonides, that the Jews' confession of faith was drawn up by Maimonides about that time in 13 articles is not denied, which articles are generally believed by all of them, without any contradiction, as Leo Modinus says. But then, this is no more proof that the article relating to the Messiah then began to be a fundamental article of their faith than the article respecting the unity of the divine being, which must be acknowledged was always the faith of the Jewish Church. Besides, Maimonides did not make, but only drew up those articles, and it is highly reasonable to suppose that he drew them up not as a novel opinion of some particular persons, but as what had been the ancient consent and universal sense of his people, and what would be received as such without hesitation, as they accordingly were. Our Joseph Albo is the only person that is usually cited as denying the article of the Messiah to be a fundamental one. He reduced the Jews' confessions of faith to 3 general heads, which he calls roots, namely the belief in the divine being, the law of Moses, and a state of rewards and punishment, to which he thought all the rest reducible. Now, though he is not willing to allow the article of Messiah to be a root or a fundamental principle, his design herein being manifestly enough to oppose the Christian religion, whose main fundamental principle is faith in Messiah Jesus, I say, though he is not willing to allow it to be a root, yet he grants that it is a branch, which arises from the 3rd root, that of the rewards of punishments, and declares that all ought to believe the Messiah, who received the law of Moses, that the prophets prophesied of his coming, which is sure and evident, that he who does not believe the coming of Messiah denies the words of the prophets and is a transgressor of the affirmative precepts. So that though he will not allow the article of the Messiah to be a fundamental one, in which he was alone and had no followers, yet he owns it to be a branch of a fundamental one, and therefore we should be so far from concluding from a single opinion of this person that there was no fundamental article of the Jewish faith, that the contrary is rather evident from hence. Secondly, the same author intimates that many of the Jews themselves have seemed to have no expectation of Messiah as the Sadducees and scribes. The Samaritan Jews, Josephus, and some in his time are Hillel in the 3rd century, nay, that Maimonides speaks very indifferently of it. As to the Sadducees, they as impatiently expected the Messiah as the rest of the Jews did, whereas intent upon detecting of Jesus that they supposed not to be the true Messiah, and were as violent opposers of him as his followers, as any others, which they would not have concerned themselves about had they not believed in a Messiah. Some say that Karaites are of the old stock of the Sadducees, and hold the same doctrines as they did, who it is certain expect a Messiah, as much as other Jews do. As to the scribes, who thought they were, as this author says, lettermen, yet believed that Christ, or the Messiah, is the son of David, and that Elias must come first. Indeed, he says that what he has said of the Sadducees and scribes, he only purposes on the way of conjecture, but it seems to be a conjecture without any foundation for it. As to the Samaritan Jews, nothing is more manifest than that, in the times of Jesus, they expected a Messiah. It was a notion which seemed universally to obtain among them, as appears from the woman at Samaria, with whom Jesus conversed, who could say, John 4:25, I know that the Messiah cometh, which is called Christ. It is allowed that the modern ones have notions of a Messiah, though very confused and very different, which need not be wondered at, since they rejected the books of the prophets and confined themselves to the 5 books of Moses. In one of their letters to Seliger, they say the name of the Messiah with them is, they seem not to know the signification of, though it seems to be an abbreviation of he that is to come, whereby the Samaritans, as well as the Jerusalem Jews, understood the Messiah, as is manifest from the words of the woman just now mentioned. As to Josephus and some other Jews in his time, who thought that Vespasian was the prince that was to come, it is manifest enough that they expected a Messiah, though they were mistaken in the person whom they thought to be he, nor can anything else be fairly concluded from hence. Our Hillel, it is true, gave out that Israel was to have no Messiah, because they enjoyed him in the days of Hezekiah. But then this was only the opinion of a single person, for notwithstanding his authority, the Jews still expect a Messiah. Besides, this saying of his was not a disbelief of the Messiah, but a mistaken notion about the time of his coming, and from Maimonides speaking indifferently of Messiah. It need not be wondered at in him, nor in any other of his nation, if there has been any other who has done so, since they have been so wretchedly disappointed in their expectation of him, and since they see so little need of and expect so little from him. Thirdly, this same author would have us believe that the expectation of a Messiah among the Jews was grounded not upon the literal, but upon the allegorical and traditional sense of the Scriptures. But if so, how came the scribes, who, as this author acknowledges, were a party of lettermen, to expect a Messiah and to say that he was the son of David, as has been before observed? Surely these men, who are supposed to have rejected many of the prevailing Jewish notions not founded on the letter of the Scriptures, would have rejected the notion of Messiah if not founded thereon. Besides, the Karaites, or Scriptorians, an ancient sect among the Jews, rejecting the mystical, enigmatical, traditional, and allegorical expositions of the rabbis strictly and closely adhere to the very letter of the scriptures, and yet expected a Messiah as much as other Jews do. Now from whence could this expectation arise, or whereon could it be grounded, but the literal sense of the scriptures? It is therefore a mistake that a notion of Messiah cannot be established from the prophecies of the Old Testament without a mystical and allegorical sense of them, for in their first literal and observed sense they respect him, as I hope the following account of them will make appear. Fourthly, I cannot but much wonder that this author should think most probable that many of the places wherein the Messiah is expressly named in the Chaldee paraphrases are interpolations, especially when he thinks that those writings are much more modern and of a later date than the Jews would have them be. For the latter the date of them is, the less reason is there to suppose them to be interpolated in those passages which respect the Messiah. For surely it can never be thought that they would take such a method with their own targums on these prophecies, when they must be supposed to know what use the Christians made of them, both against them and vindication of Christianity. Nor is there anything with which the Jews are more puzzled and confounded than when they are urged with their paraphrases that there is a great deal of reason to suppose that those places wherein the Messiah is expressly named are so far from being interpolations that were not those writings so sacred to them as that they dare not corrupt them, they would have expunged them long ago. As to this author's reason for these thoughts, that Josephus says those Jews who were in the vulgar era or the belief of a Messiah to arise out of their nation built their expectations on one ambiguous oracle of prophecy founded in their sacred books. I would only reply that Josephus indeed speaks of an oracle or prophecy founded in their sacred books. At about that time, one of them from their own country would rule the world, which oracle he calls an ambiguous one and says was what chiefly excited the Jews to war. But then he nowhere says the Jews' expectation of Messiah was built upon one single doubtful prophecy, but that their expectation of his arising out of their country and at that time was so, the ambiguity of which oracle lay in his arising out of their nation, which some understood of his being born there, as the generality of the Jews did, and others of his entering upon the government there, as Josephus did, and therefore applied it to Vespasian. From whence it appears that this incident gives no reason to conclude that the passages respecting the Messiah in the Chaldee paraphrases are interpolations, for the Jews might have many plain prophecies on which they built their expectation of a Messiah, some of which these paraphrases have pointed out to us, and yet Josephus speaks about one ambiguous or doubtful prophecy respecting the time of his coming and the country from whence he was to arise, which excited the Jews to war and animated them obstinately to persist therein, in which he supposes them to be mistaken, though, alas, the ground of their mistake, and which therefore was fatal to them, was that the Messiah, the person prophesied of, was already come. I conclude with desiring the reader to observe that I do not produce the prophecies of the Old Testament respecting the Messiah's second coming as literally fulfilled in Jesus, but as it be so fulfilled in him. And the reason of my taking notice of them is to make the scheme of prophecy more complete, and seeing all the rest of the prophecies with respect to the Messiah have a literal completion in Jesus, there is a great deal of reason to believe that these will also, especially seeing it is such a compilation of them that Jesus and his apostles have given us reason to expect. I have not indeed inquired into the authenticity of the book of Daniel and of the 2 chapters of St. Matthew's Gospel, which the author of the scheme of literal prophecy has called in question, but have taken them for genuine parts of the sacred writings. The reason why I have not attempted to inquire of this nature when I have had occasion to consider some passages in these parts of Scripture is because I was not willing to interrupt the reader by breaking the thread of prophecy. I must confess that what this author has advanced on this head deserves consideration, and I hope that some of the learned writers in this controversy will think it worth their notice and regard. I shall only add that whereas my design in writing the following sheets is an honest and impartial inquiry after truth and an attempt to establish and promote it, in doing of which, as I have treated the argument with candour and temper, so I hope, if I should appear to be mistaken in anything I have advanced, I shall be candidly treated as I shall be heartfully thankful for a discovery.